In September 2018, Marcus Bellamy walked into the Appalachian wilderness carrying a day pack and a water bottle. 5 years later, he walked out carrying something else entirely. Over 200 drawings of a world that shouldn't exist. The ranger who first saw Marcus emerge from the tree line said the same thing every witness would repeat in the months that followed. He looked like he'd aged 15 years, not 5. Gaunt, hollow-eyed, skin so pale it seemed translucent. Marcus stumbled into the Cherokee National Forest Ranger Station in Tennessee, clutching a weathered leather satchel against his chest like a life preserver. When Ranger Janet Kowalski approached him, Marcus flinched away from the fluorescent lights, squinting as if seeing artificial illumination for the first time. "I need to report a missing person," he said, his voice rusty from disuse. When Kowalski asked who was missing, Marcus paused, confusion flickering across his face. "Me, I think. I've been missing." The man standing in that ranger station bore little resemblance to the Marcus Bellamy who disappeared 5 years earlier. That Marcus had been a 34-year-old software engineer from Asheville, an experienced hiker who knew the Appalachian Trail like his own backyard. He'd documented dozens of solo hikes on his blog, always methodical, always prepared. His last post, dated September 15, 2018, had been characteristically practical, attempting the Rough Ridge to Grandfather Mountain section. "Weather looks good, solo hike back Tuesday." He never came back Tuesday or any day after. The search that followed Marcus's disappearance had been one of the most extensive in western North Carolina's history. Over 400 volunteers combed the mountainous terrain. Bloodhounds tracked his scent to mile marker 47 on a remote section of trail, then lost it completely, as if Marcus had simply evaporated. Helicopters equipped with thermal imaging found nothing. Ground teams discovered no campsite, no discarded equipment, not even the crushed vegetation that would mark where someone had stepped off the trail. Detective Sarah Chen had been assigned the case in its final weeks when hope was already dissolving into grim acceptance. She'd spent months interviewing Marcus's friends, family, and hiking companions, building a profile of a careful man who didn't take unnecessary risks. Marcus planned his routes obsessively, always informed someone of his itinerary, carried emergency beacons and first aid supplies. The idea that such a prepared hiker could vanish without leaving any trace defied logic. "People don't just disappear," Chen had told Marcus's sister Rebecca during one of their final meetings. "We'll keep looking." But privately, she'd begun to suspect they were searching for remains, not a living person. The case went cold. Marcus Bellamy joined the unfortunate ranks of hikers who'd walked into the wilderness and never walked out. A reminder that the mountains could be generous to the prepared and merciless to the unlucky, regardless of experience. Until September 23, 2023, when Marcus walked back into the world carrying his impossible satchel. "I kept them safe," he'd whispered to Ranger Kowalski, opening the leather bag with trembling fingers. "All of it. Every street, every building, every symbol. They told me to remember, so I remembered." Inside the satchel were sketches unlike anything Kowalski had ever seen. Detailed architectural drawings rendered in charcoal and what appeared to be some kind of mineral pigment. Buildings that seemed to grow from rock formations, their surfaces covered in intricate symbols. Maps of tunnel systems stretching for miles, marked with notations and handwriting that was recognizably Marcus's but somehow changed. More careful, more precise, as if drawn by someone who'd had nothing but time to perfect each line. The drawings showed vast underground spaces, not caves but constructed areas with impossible geometries. Bridges spanning caverns that would dwarf football stadiums, towers that spiraled down into depths the sketches couldn't capture. And throughout every drawing, the symbols, thousands of them arranged in patterns that suggested language but followed no linguistic rules that human experts could identify. When paramedics examined Marcus at the ranger station, they found a man in severe physical distress. Malnourished, dehydrated, suffering from what appeared to be extreme photosensitivity. He couldn't tolerate direct sunlight or bright artificial lights without visible pain. His muscle mass had deteriorated significantly, but in a pattern that suggested prolonged confinement rather than wilderness survival. His hands, however, were calloused in specific ways. The pads of his fingers developed as if he'd spent years drawing. His right shoulder strengthened as if from constant repetitive motion. Most puzzling were the mineral deposits embedded in his clothing and under his fingernails. Doctor Amanda Torres, the geologist who analyzed the samples, found compounds that had no business being in the Appalachian Mountains. These minerals form under specific pressure and temperature conditions, she explained to Detective Chen, who'd been called back to the case within hours of Marcus's return. The closest natural occurrence would be deep ocean thermal vents or certain volcanic regions. There's nothing like this anywhere in North Carolina or Tennessee. But it was Marcus's mental state that proved most disturbing. During his initial medical evaluation, he answered questions about his identity, his family, and his disappearance with perfect accuracy, until the conversation turned to where he'd been. Then his responses became a mixture of vivid detail and impossible claims. "I fell through," he insisted, his voice gaining strength when he spoke of his experience. "The ground just opened. One step I was on the trail, the next I was falling through rock. But soft rock that moved like fabric." He described landing in a vast underground chamber lit by some kind of bioluminescent moss. Not moss, he'd corrected himself immediately. They cultivated it, grew it in patterns, for light, for beauty. They had gardens down there, but not like our gardens, plants that had never seen the sun, bred for darkness. When asked who they were, Marcus's responses became increasingly fragmented. Sometimes he spoke of the underground dwellers as if they were human, the architects who showed me their plans. Other times his description suggested something else entirely. They moved differently, quieter, like they'd learned to walk without disturbing the stone. Hospital psychiatrist Dr. Michael Reeves conducted extensive interviews with Marcus over his first week back. "He displays none of the typical signs of deliberate deception," Reeves noted in his initial report. "His pupil responses, voice patterns, and body language all suggest he genuinely believes what he's describing. But the content of his claims requires explanation beyond simple truthfulness." The drawings became the focus of intense scrutiny. Architectural experts noted their technical precision. The perspective work alone suggested advanced understanding of engineering principles that Marcus had never studied. Professor Janet Morse from NC State's College of Design examined dozens of the sketches and concluded they represented impossible but internally consistent structures. "These aren't fantasy drawings," she explained to Detective Chen. "Every line serves a structural purpose. The proportions are mathematically sound. The load distributions are accurate. Whoever drew these understood architectural engineering at a professional level. But they're designing for environments that don't exist, spaces without gravity constraints, materials with properties our technology can't achieve." The symbols embedded throughout the drawings presented another mystery. Linguist Dr. Aaron Webb from Duke University spent weeks analyzing the markings, finding patterns that suggested systematic language but no connection to any known writing system. "It's too consistent to be random marks," Webb reported. "There's definitely grammatical structure, recurring elements that function like syntax, but it's unlike any language family we've cataloged. If it's fabricated, it represents an extraordinary feat of constructed linguistics." Detective Chen found herself caught between competing impossibilities. Either Marcus Bellamy had survived alone in the wilderness for 5 years while experiencing elaborate hallucinations and somehow acquiring advanced technical knowledge and artistic skills he'd never possessed, or his account contained elements of truth that current understanding couldn't accommodate. The investigation took an unexpected turn when Chen decided to examine historical disappearances in the same area. What she found complicated the case further. Going back through decades of missing person reports, she identified a pattern. Every few years, someone vanished in that same remote section of trail. Not hikers unprepared for the mountains. These were experienced outdoors people who knew the terrain. Like Marcus, they left no trace beyond a certain point, as if the earth had swallowed them whole. In 1987, geologist Dr. Patricia Vance disappeared while conducting a solo survey of mineral deposits. In 1994, it was hunting guide Tom Weatherby who'd grown up in those mountains. In 2003, nature photographer Lisa Hartwell vanished while documenting old-growth forest regions. In 2011, just 7 years before Marcus, Forest Service Ranger Kevin Daniels failed to return from a routine patrol. None of them were ever found. None left any evidence of their fate. But going deeper into local records, Chen discovered something that made her reconsider everything she thought she knew about the region. The Cherokee National Forest archives contained folders dating back to the area's first European settlement. Mixed among routine administrative documents were incident reports that read like folklore. Settlers claiming to have seen lights moving underground, stories of people who'd fallen into sinkholes and returned years later with tales of underground cities, reports of strange symbols carved into trees and rock faces. Most intriguing was a collection of sketches from 1892 drawn by a surveyor named Thomas Garrett, who'd supposedly spent 3 years underground after falling through what he described as false ground. His drawings, preserved in the Historical Society's archives, showed architectural structures remarkably similar to Marcus's, the same impossible geometries, the same systematic use of unknown symbols. Either we're dealing with a remarkably consistent delusion that's been recurring for over a century, Chen told her captain, or there's something about this area we don't understand. The breakthrough came when Marcus agreed to take a polygraph test. Dr. Susan Martinez, the examiner, had expected clear signs of deception. After all, his claims defied known reality. Instead, she found something more unsettling. "He's not lying," Martinez reported. "Every physiological indicator confirms he believes absolutely in the truth of his statements. When he describes the underground cities, his stress levels decrease. When we ask him about surface events during his missing years, his anxiety spikes significantly. It's as if being underground was, for him, normal reality, and returning to the surface world is the traumatic experience." The test results forced Chen to confront an uncomfortable possibility. What if Marcus was telling the truth as he understood it? She arranged for geological surveys of the area where Marcus claimed to have fallen through. The results were definitive: solid bedrock extending hundreds of feet down, with no cave systems, sinkholes, or void spaces that could accommodate the structures in his drawings. Whatever Marcus had experienced, it hadn't happened in any physical location the surveys could detect. Yet the drawings continued to accumulate detail. During his hospital stay, Marcus filled notebook after notebook with increasingly elaborate sketches. The underground city he portrayed grew more complex with each drawing. Residential districts, manufacturing areas, vast communal spaces, and what appeared to be transportation systems using principles of engineering that existed nowhere in human technology. "I have to get it all down for," he explained to Dr. Reeves during one of their sessions. "They trusted me to remember. The surface people needed to know," they said, "about the deep places, about the old agreements. But I'm forgetting already. The light up here, it burns the memories away. I have to draw fast before it's all gone." When asked about these old agreements, Marcus became agitated. The compact, the understanding. Surface people stay above, deep people stay below, and the spaces between belong to neither. But something's changing. The deep people, they're worried. They say the surface people are digging too deep, disturbing things that should stay quiet. Chen pressed for details. "What things? Where were people digging?" "Everywhere," Marcus replied, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Mining, fracking, deep construction. Every time you break through into spaces that were meant to stay closed, you risk, wake them up. The things that were put to sleep in the deep places. The things the compact was meant to keep contained." Dr. Reeves noted that Marcus's agitation increased significantly when discussing modern industrial activity. He becomes almost frantic when the conversation turns to deep earth excavation. It's clearly a source of severe anxiety for him. But it was Marcus's final set of drawings that proved most disturbing. Unlike the architectural studies and maps, these sketches showed movement, figures ascending through tunnel systems, emerging into upper levels that looked increasingly like natural cave systems. And in the margins of these drawings, Marcus had written urgent notes. They're coming up. The deep sleepers. The old things. The compact is breaking. Detective Chen stared at these latest sketches in her office late one evening, trying to reconcile the impossible elements of the case. The drawings were too detailed, too consistent, too technically sophisticated to be simple delusion. The geological evidence ruled out the physical existence of Marcus's underground city. The historical patterns suggested something recurring but unexplainable. And Marcus himself remained an enigma, physically present, mentally coherent, but carrying memories of a world that couldn't exist. Outside her window, the Appalachian mountains stretched into darkness, their familiar profiles suddenly seeming less solid, less permanent than they had before she'd encountered Marcus Bellamy's drawings of the world beneath. As Chen studied the sketches, she noticed something she'd missed in earlier examinations. The symbols that appeared throughout Marcus's drawings weren't entirely unknown after all. Carved into courthouse foundations, etched into old tombstones, worked into the decorative elements of century-old buildings throughout the region, the same markings appeared, faded, weathered, but recognizable to someone who'd spent weeks studying Marcus's detailed reproductions. The realization hit her like cold water. Whatever Marcus had experienced, whatever had happened to him in those missing 5 years, it was connected to something that had been part of this landscape far longer than anyone had realized. The symbols were everywhere once Chen knew how to look for them. Driving through downtown Asheville the morning after her revelation, she spotted them worked into the wrought iron railings of a Victorian mansion, disguised as decorative flourishes. The Buncombe County Courthouse, built in 1876, had them carved into its cornerstone, weathered but unmistakable. Even the old Riverside Cemetery contained headstones where the familiar markings appeared alongside conventional epitaphs, as if whoever had commissioned the stones wanted to ensure the dead would be recognized by more than one set of eyes. Chen photographed everything she found, building a catalog that grew more unsettling with each discovery. The symbols weren't random decorations, they followed patterns, appearing most frequently on buildings constructed during specific time periods and in specific locations. A geologist friend helped her overlay the symbol locations onto topographic maps of the region. What emerged was a rough outline of the underground spaces Marcus had drawn, as if the surface markings served as waypoints for something beneath. When she presented her findings to Marcus during a hospital visit, his reaction was immediate and visceral. He began trembling the moment she showed him the first photograph, symbols carved into the base of a Civil War memorial. "You found them," he whispered, his voice filled with something between relief and terror. "The markers, they told me surface people would have forgotten, but they're still there, still marking the boundaries." "What boundaries, Marcus?" "Between the territories. The deep people, they respected what came before. But they needed to mark what belonged to them, what belonged to the surface, and what belonged to the old things that sleep in the spaces between." His hands moved across the photographs with surprising gentleness. "These stones, they're not just markers, they're warnings and agreements." Chen felt a chill that had nothing to do with the hospital's air conditioning. Agreements about what? About staying separate. Surface people above, deep people below, and never ever disturbing the deepest places where the old sleepers rest. The symbols, they mark the thin places, spots where someone could fall through if they weren't careful, but also where things could come up if the agreements were broken. That night, Chen couldn't sleep. She found herself driving back to the Cherokee National Forest, parking at the trailhead where Marcus had begun his hike 5 years earlier. With flashlight in hand, she walked the familiar trail looking for symbols she might have missed during the original investigation. She found them at mile marker 47, exactly where the bloodhounds had lost Marcus's scent. Carved into a massive oak tree were the same markings from his drawings, so old and weathered they'd been invisible unless someone knew exactly what to look for. But once seen, they were unmistakable. Standing beside the marked tree, Chen noticed something else. A slight depression in the ground nearby, roughly circular and about 6 feet across. It looked like natural settling, the kind of minor subsidence that occurred throughout the mountains as underground water carved away limestone. But when she knelt and examined it more closely, the depression was too perfectly round, too evenly distributed, and the soil within felt different, softer, as if it had been disturbed and reset. Chen's flashlight beam caught something metallic glinting near the depression's center. She brushed away loose earth and found a small piece of surveying equipment, an old-style compass bearing the initials TG carved into its brass surface. Thomas Garrett, the surveyor from 1892 whose drawings had so closely matched Marcus's. She called Dr. Torres immediately despite the late hour. "I need a geological survey of specific coordinates," she said. "Deep penetrating radar, seismic analysis, everything you can do." "Sarah, it's almost midnight." "The equipment that went missing in 1892, I found it right where Marcus claims he fell through." Torres was silent for a long moment. "I'll be there in the morning." The geological survey took 3 days. Torres's team used ground-penetrating radar, seismic imaging, and core sampling to examine the area around the marked tree. What they found challenged everything they thought they understood about the local geology. "There's definitely a void space," Torres reported to Chen as they stood beside the surveying equipment. "But it's not a natural cave formation. The shape is too regular, too geometrically precise, and it's deep, at least 300 feet down, maybe more. Our equipment can't get reliable readings beyond that depth." "How is that possible? Previous surveys showed solid bedrock." "That's the strange part. The bedrock is there, but it's layered differently than we expected, almost like geological strata that formed under impossible conditions, temperature variations that shouldn't exist, mineral formations that require contradictory environments to develop." Torres pointed to her readout screens. "If I didn't know better, I'd say this area has been subject to geological processes that don't occur naturally on Earth." Chen stared at the innocuous-looking depression in the forest floor. "Could someone fall through?" "Not under normal circumstances. The surface looks stable enough. But if there were some kind of seismic event or if the supporting structures beneath gave way," Torres shrugged. "The void space is definitely there. Whether it's accessible from the surface, I can't determine without more invasive investigation." That evening, Chen sat in her office reviewing the accumulated evidence, Marcus's drawings now numbering over 400 pieces, the historical pattern of disappearances, the geological anomalies, the symbols marking locations throughout the region, the physical evidence of Marcus's changed condition. All of it pointed towards something that shouldn't exist but refused to be dismissed as delusion. Her phone rang at 9 p.m. Ranger Kowalski. "Detective Chen? You need to get to the hospital. Marcus Bellamy is asking for you specifically. He says they're calling him back." Chen found Marcus in his hospital room, sitting beside the window and staring out at the mountains. He'd been drawing again. The nightstand was covered with fresh sketches, but these were different from his previous work. Instead of architectural studies, these drawings showed movement. Figures ascending through tunnel systems, ancient symbols glowing with their own light. And in every sketch, the same urgent notation repeated in Marcus's careful handwriting: "The compact is ending." "They spoke to me in the deep place," Marcus said without turning from the window. "The deep people. They've been waiting for the right messenger, someone who could carry their warning to the surface. I thought I was lost down there, but they chose me. They taught me to see, to remember, to draw what needed to be preserved." "Marcus, you've been back for 2 weeks. How are they still speaking to you?" For the first time since her arrival, Marcus turned to face her. His eyes, which had been pale and hollow when he'd first emerged from the forest, now held flecks of something that seemed to catch light in ways human irises shouldn't. "Distance doesn't matter in the deep places. Time works differently too. 5 years down there, but it felt like 50, or 5 days. They needed time to teach me everything the surface people would need to know." He gestured toward his latest drawings. "But the teaching is finished now. The message is complete. And the agreements that kept the surface and deep worlds separate, they're breaking down." What do you mean breaking down? Marcus stood and walked to his drawings, his movements still carrying that strange fluidity Chen had noticed during his first days back. Industrial mining, deep drilling, hydraulic fracturing. Every time surface people drive machinery deep into the earth, they damage the barriers. And every barrier that breaks makes it easier for the old sleepers to wake up. He picked up one of his sketches, a cross-section view of underground spaces that seemed to extend infinitely downward. The deep people built their cities in the spaces between the surface and the truly deep places. They served as guardians, I suppose, keeping watch over things that were sealed away long before humans existed. But if the barriers keep breaking, if the old sleepers wake up completely, what happens then? Then the surface world learns why some places were always meant to stay hidden. Chen studied the drawing Marcus held. Unlike his earlier architectural sketches, this one showed organic shapes, things that moved and writhed in the deepest levels, held in place by geometric constraints that looked increasingly fragile. Marcus, I need you to be completely honest with me. Are you planning to go back down there? He was quiet for a long time, still staring at his drawing of the impossible depths. They gave me a choice, he finally said. Stay on the surface and watch the barriers fail one by one, knowing I could have prevented it, or return and help them reinforce what's left of the ancient agreements. But if I go back, he set the drawing down carefully. If I go back, I won't return again. The journey changes you each time, and I'm already more deep person than surface person now. What about your family? Your sister Rebecca has been waiting 5 years for you to come home. I know. Marcus's voice carried genuine pain. But Rebecca has her life, her family, her world. If I don't go back, if the barriers fail completely, none of that will matter anyway. Chen felt the weight of impossible responsibility settling on her shoulders. How do I make sense of any of this in my reports? How do I explain to my superiors that you're considering returning to a place that doesn't exist according to every geological survey we've conducted? The same way you'll explain the symbols carved into buildings throughout the region. The same way you'll explain the pattern of disappearances dating back over a century. The same way you'll explain the mineral compounds in my clothing that shouldn't exist anywhere in North America. Marcus returned to the window, his pale reflection ghost-like against the dark glass. Some things can't be explained, Detective. They can only be witnessed, and sometimes acted upon. That night, Chen made a decision that would haunt her for the rest of her career. Instead of filing her report immediately, she drove to Rebecca Bellamy's house in Asheville. Rebecca answered the door still wearing scrubs. She worked as a nurse at Mission Hospital and had just gotten off her shift. When she saw Chen's expression, her face went pale. Is Marcus okay? He's alive, but I need to talk to you about something important, something that's going to be very difficult to believe. They sat in Rebecca's kitchen while Chen explained everything, the drawings, the geological anomalies, the historical patterns, and Marcus's claim that he needed to return underground to prevent some kind of catastrophic breakdown of ancient barriers. Rebecca listened without interruption, her expression cycling through disbelief, fear, anger, and finally a kind of exhausted acceptance. He's different, she said when Chen finished. Not just physically. When he talks about this underground place, he sounds peaceful, certain. It's the only time since he's been back that he doesn't seem like he's in pain. She was quiet for a moment. But he's my brother. He's the only family I have left. I know this is an impossible decision. No, Rebecca's voice was firm. It's not my decision to make. If Marcus believes he needs to go back, if he believes lives depend on it. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. I spent 5 years learning to let go of him once. I suppose I can learn to do it again. The next morning, Chen returned to the hospital to find Marcus's room empty. The nurses said he'd left sometime during the night shift. No one had seen him go, but his clothes were folded neatly on the bed, and his drawings were stacked in perfect order on the nightstand. Tucked beneath the pile was a note addressed to Detective Chen. The barriers are failing faster now. I can feel them breaking one by one as the deep sleepers begin to stir. The deep people need help reinforcing what remains, and I'm the only surface person who knows the way back. Thank you for believing when belief was impossible. The drawings contain everything the surface world needs to understand the agreement. Guard them carefully. What comes next depends on whether people listen. Tell Rebecca I'm sorry, but also that I'm finally going home." Marcus Chen drove immediately to the Cherokee National Forest, though she already knew what she would find. At mile marker 47, beside the ancient oak tree with its weathered symbols, the circular depression had changed. Where the ground had been soft but stable, now there was an opening, not a sinkhole or cave entrance, but something that looked like stone flowing like water, creating a passage that descended beyond the reach of flashlight beams. Dr. Torres's team confirmed what Chen already knew. The geological readings had changed overnight. The void space they detected was now accessible from the surface, though the passage itself defied conventional understanding of how rock and earth behaved. "It's like the stone became temporarily fluid," Torres explained, staring at the readings. "Allowed something to pass through, then re-solidified, but not completely. The opening is still there, still accessible, but it's unstable. I wouldn't recommend anyone attempt to investigate." Chen spent hours at the site, staring down into the impossible passage that had swallowed Marcus Bellamy twice. She thought about his drawings, now secured in evidence storage, depicting a world of underground cities and ancient agreements. She thought about the symbols carved throughout the region, marking boundaries between territories that weren't supposed to exist. She thought about Rebecca Bellamy, learning to grieve her brother a second time. Most of all, she thought about Marcus's final warning about barriers failing and old sleepers stirring in the deepest places. Over the following months, Chen documented everything meticulously. The geological changes at mile marker 47, the historical patterns of disappearances, the symbolic markings throughout the region, Marcus's drawings and their technical precision, the mineral samples that couldn't be explained by conventional geology. Her official report stated that Marcus Bellamy had returned briefly after 5 years missing, displaying signs of severe psychological trauma and elaborate delusions, and had subsequently died by suicide at the location of his original disappearance. The unusual geological features at mile marker 47 were noted as requiring further study. Unofficially, Chen kept copies of everything, including Marcus's drawings and his urgent warnings about failing barriers. She needed those records when the industrial accidents began. The first incident occurred 6 months after Marcus's second disappearance. A deep mining operation in eastern Kentucky broke through into what should have been solid bedrock and instead found a vast void space. 3 miners were lost when the tunnel floor collapsed, dropping them into depths that recovery equipment couldn't reach. The mining company sealed the breach and listed the incident as an unfortunate encounter with an unmapped cave system. But Chen recognized the geological patterns from Dr. Torres's reports. More importantly, she recognized the symbols that miners had found carved into the walls of the void space before the collapse. Similar incidents followed with increasing frequency. A hydraulic fracturing operation in West Virginia cracked through into spaces that shouldn't exist. A subway extension in Washington, D.C. encountered chambers filled with bioluminescent material and architectural structures that predated human civilization in North America. A geothermal drilling project in North Carolina reached what should have been standard thermal layers and instead found evidence of vast constructed spaces. In each case, the official response was the same: unusual geological formations, unmapped cave systems, natural phenomena requiring further study. But Chen noted that every incident occurred in regions where the old symbols appeared in historical buildings. And in every case, the breakthrough was quickly sealed, the sites declared unsafe for further investigation. The pattern held until the morning Chen received a call that made her blood freeze. "Detective Chen? This is Dr. Elena Vasquez from the CDC. We need to discuss Marcus Bellamy and some unusual health reports we've been receiving from your region." Dr. Vasquez arrived in Asheville that afternoon carrying files that she spread across Chen's desk with obvious reluctance. Over the past 3 months, Vasquez explained, we've documented 17 cases of what we're calling subterranean adaptation syndrome, patients presenting with extreme photosensitivity, altered mineral composition in their blood and tissue samples, and psychological conditions that include elaborate shared delusions about underground civilizations. Chen felt cold recognition as she looked through the medical reports. Where are these patients located? That's the concerning part. They're all residents of areas where industrial accidents have occurred, areas where deep excavation projects have broken through into unmapped underground spaces, and Detective Vasquez pulled out a photograph. They're all producing drawings remarkably similar to the ones in Marcus Bellamy's case file. The photograph showed sketches identical to Marcus's work, the same architectural impossibilities, the same symbolic language, the same urgent warnings about failing barriers and stirring sleepers. Are you suggesting some kind of psychological contagion? Chen asked, though she already knew the answer wouldn't be that simple. We've considered that possibility, but the patients have no known connection to each other or to Marcus Bellamy. They come from different states, different backgrounds, different social and economic circumstances, and the medical changes they're displaying, the mineral deposits, the photosensitivity, the muscular adaptations, these aren't psychosomatic. Something is physically altering these people. Chen stared at the drawings spread across her desk. Dr. Vasquez, I need to ask you something, and I need you to consider the possibility that the answer might challenge everything we think we understand about what's happening. What if these aren't delusions? What if these people are drawing real places? Vasquez was quiet for a long time. Detective, I'm a scientist. I deal in evidence and measurable phenomena. But I'll tell you this, we have 17 people in different states who are all describing the same underground world in identical detail. They're using the same symbolic language. They're reporting the same warnings about ancient barriers and sleeping entities. And they're all physically changing in ways that suggest prolonged exposure to environments that don't exist anywhere on the Earth's surface. What are you recommending? Officially, we're classifying this as an unknown environmental exposure with associated psychological effects. Unofficially, Vasquez gathered her papers with hands that weren't entirely steady. I'm recommending that industrial deep excavation projects in affected regions be suspended until we understand what's happening. Because if these patients are right about barriers failing and old things waking up, we need to stop breaking through into spaces we don't understand. That evening, Chen drove to the Cherokee National Forest one final time. At mile marker 47, the passage that had swallowed Marcus was now sealed, not with human engineering, but with stone that had flowed like water and reset itself into configurations that seemed designed to prevent anything from passing in either direction. But the symbols carved into the ancient oak tree had changed. New markings appeared alongside the old, fresh cuts that hadn't been there during her last visit. Chen photographed them, noting their similarity to the warning notations Marcus had included in his final drawings. As she prepared to leave, movement in her peripheral vision made her turn. For just a moment, she thought she saw a figure standing among the trees. Gaunt, pale, but unmistakably Marcus Bellamy. He raised one hand in what might have been greeting or farewell, then stepped backward into shadows that seemed too deep for the forest around them. When Chen looked again, nothing was there but trees and darkness. 6 months later, Chen submitted her final report on the Marcus Bellamy case. The official version concluded that the subject had suffered severe psychological trauma during his disappearance and had died by suicide at the location where he'd originally vanished. The unusual drawings and geological anomalies were noted as requiring further study but posed no threat to public safety. Her personal files told a different story, one of ancient agreements breaking down, underground civilizations struggling to maintain barriers that kept incomprehensible entities contained, and surface world industrial activity that was unwittingly releasing things that had been deliberately buried in the deepest places of the earth. Chen kept those files secured in her home safe, along with copies of Marcus's drawings and Dr. Vasquez's medical reports on the affected patients. Sometimes, late at night, she would spread the drawings across her kitchen table and study Marcus's meticulous documentation of the impossible world beneath. In quiet moments, she found herself wondering if he had been trying to save them all. The industrial accidents continued. The affected patients multiplied. And somewhere in the depths beneath the Appalachian Mountains, Chen believed Marcus Bellamy was working alongside beings that predated human civilization, desperately reinforcing the barriers between the surface world and the deep places where ancient things slept fitfully, stirring more with each passing day. She never returned to mile marker 47. But sometimes driving through the mountains at dusk, Chen would notice the symbols carved into old buildings and wonder how many other people were beginning to see them, beginning to understand their meaning, beginning to change in ways that would prepare them for whatever was slowly awakening in the darkness beneath their feet. The mountains kept their secrets, but Marcus had taught her that some secrets were never meant to stay buried forever.